Imu is not going to be Luffy's opponent in the final war. Imu is Luffy's opponent in this arc, Elbaf. From the very beginning, Elbaf has always been a storyline building to Luffy awakening the next level of Conqueror's Haki against Imu, and proving that he is the true successor to Joy Boy, the painful reminder of what he needs to actually become in order to protect his crew and save Elbaf. All of this is set up for him to take a huge leap forward here, today, not in some distant future battle. And of course, the natural objections are that, first, Imu is simply too important to be defeated before the final war, and second, Imu is too strong for Luffy to defeat him here. And to that first objection, to be clear, Imu will not be permanently defeated here in Elbaf. Rather, he will be driven out of Elbaf by Luffy's hands, but will still remain a major villain in the final war, where he is set up to be defeated by other characters, as at that point, Luffy's main enemy will become Blackbeard. And as for the second objection of Imu being too strong, well, yes, Imu is too strong for Luffy, but Imu is not too strong for Joy Boy. And this entire arc from the beginning has been about Luffy finally stepping into his role as the next Joy Boy. I'll be breaking down why, according to Elbaf's themes and Luffy's character journey, he is clearly set to save Elbaf from Imu here, why that makes sense in terms of general narrative progression prior to the final war, and how it is all framed to play out in a manner that doesn't undermine Imu's strength as a villain in the final war, or make Luffy too strong too fast. By the end of this video, I promise it will all make sense, so make sure to subscribe. But first, we're doing a huge summer sale, where you can buy any 2 posters and get 3 free. And we mean any 2 posters, because this month, all collections are on sale. The Island posters, the Ship posters, and the Legends posters. Just mix and match any posters you like from across all collections, and the huge discount will be automatically applied at checkout. We are offering this site-wide deal for August only, so if you've been waiting to get your hands on any of these collections, now is the time. So get your poster while this summer sale lasts by hitting the link in the description below. So that aside, to begin with, we need to first understand what the story of Elbaf is about and what type of ending we are heading towards. Even as the arc has gotten darker and darker for our protagonists, I've consistently argued that each new blow to the heroes seems to be a setup for them to come back much stronger and vanquish their demons in this arc itself, and that's for 2 reasons. In the first place, thematically, Elbaf is an arc about triumph. This is not an arc set to end in crushing defeat. The whole point is that Elbaf, much like the rest of the world, has been manipulated by Imu and the Celestial Dragons for far too long. And the battle that we are getting here is the nation of Elbaf, led by Nika and Nidhogg at its helm, is finally stepping up and putting an end to this. This is an arc about defiance and fighting back and proving that they cannot be stepped on. There's been a lot of talk among readers about how the heroes are just gonna have to wait till Imu's timer runs out and he has to leave to go home, which is really funny because this timer that everyone seems to have headcanoned into existence has never been established. The timer is what we readers concocted because Imu bled a little when he arrived here, and Imu seems to be so strong that we literally can't fathom Imu being beaten. Therefore, we all had to collectively hallucinate a timer so that we can all tell ourselves, look, Imu can only be in Elbaf for so long before he magically just has to leave. Even though, guess what, Imu frankly doesn't seem to ever act like he's really in any sort of a hurry. And the whole timer headcanon also directly goes against the whole idea of the arc, which is actually fighting back. The arc is not about just getting your ass beat until the bell rings and the winner has to go home. However Imu is leaving Elbaf, it needs to be earned. And that is a large part of the themes of Elbaf as well. If the Straw Hats are actually going to be the ones to bring the dawn of the world, they need to earn it. They need to get a lot stronger right here, right now. That is what Gaban has preached over and over, first to Zoro, then to Sanji, and now to Luffy. The message is you are not good enough, you need to become good enough right here, right now, if you want to protect your captain, your crew, and this land. And what's also funny is that if you ask readers if Gaban's lecture to Sanji is a setup for Sanji to get a huge Conqueror's Haki boost in Elbaf and defeat his opponent, they would say, obviously yes. If you ask readers if Gaban's lecture to Zoro is a setup for Zoro to get a huge Conqueror's Haki boost in Elbaf and defeat his opponent, they would say, obviously yes. But if you ask readers if Gaban's lecture to Luffy is a setup for Luffy to get a huge Conqueror's Haki boost in Elbaf and defeat his opponent, the reaction strangely seems to be, no, that can't be what that means. There is literally nothing different about what Gaban's lectures to Zoro, Sanji, and Luffy all narratively imply they each need to do this arc, but because it seems Luffy has a much higher mountain to climb relative to Zoro and Sanji, readers are discounting only Luffy's case. And look, I get it, power scaling does matter. Not more than narrative, but it does matter. But rest assured, that point will be addressed by the end of the video, so just don't worry about the power scaling for the moment, and let's just focus on the actual writing implications for Luffy so far in this arc. So first, to be clear, Luffy isn't going to just solo Imu, at least not at first. As I've explained in previous videos, Elbaf seems to be set up for a large team effort against Imu, with most likely the Straw Hats in particular having to stall Imu for some time before Loki and Luffy get back into the fray. But make no mistake, it will ultimately be Luffy who finishes the battle. As is the case with every large team battle in One Piece, be that against Oars and Moria, or the Pacifista, or Kaido, whoever it is will all come down to Luffy in the end. And even if the health bar of the villain is depleted, the villain is not going to lose unless Luffy can take it home. So looking at Luffy's story in Elbaf, again, big picture thematically, Elbaf is about fighting back, but it's also about the legend of Nika. This whole arc has been framing the idea of how when everything falls into despair, there is a warrior who will save the giants, the warrior that they have believed in for centuries, Nika. Over and over the arc has hammered in this destiny that is waiting for Luffy, for him to become the savior that everyone imagines him to be, to live up to the legend of Nika from past eras. And this time, Luffy has to be the one to defeat the big bad evil devil that no one else can stop. But the problem that is being highlighted right now is that Luffy isn't yet that man. He's not the next Nika, he's not the next Joy Boy, he's not even the next Roger at this moment. Luffy's defeat to Imu proved all that, and Gaban's speech hammered it in. And that's the key here. Everything Gaban is spelling out for us is precisely the character conflict that Luffy has to overcome this arc. The exact same way Gaban explained to Zoro that he needs to learn to control his Conqueror's Haki if he wants to be the wing of the king, the exact same way Gaban explained to Sanji that he needs to find the king within himself if he wants to be the wing of the king, Gaban is telling Luffy that he needs to prove himself right now. He needs to save Elbaf right now. Not some timer, not some Deus Ex Machina, not Daddy Shanks or Dragon arriving to bail him out. No, Luffy needs to save Elbaf. It cannot be any clearer that that is what Luffy's burden is this arc, and Gaban is outright establishing that if Luffy cannot do this right here and now, then he is not the man that everyone was waiting for. He's not the man who can call himself the Pirate King. The bar is set, and it's not for some future day down the line, it's for Luffy to save this land and his crew. And the irony is that readers' biggest argument against Luffy doing that is that it's too hard, which is also precisely what Oda is having Gaban call out straight up. Duh, it's supposed to be hard. It's supposed to seem impossible. If this was meant to be easy, Luffy should have just stayed home. The reality is, Oda has already told us what Luffy has to do by the end of this arc, and the key is that Luffy himself has become determined to rise to that challenge. Remember, whenever Luffy has lost to the main villain of the arc, whether it's Crocodile, or Enel, or Lucci, or Doflamingo, or Kaido, it has always been a setup for Luffy to get the run back and win against them in that same storyline. Now, the only exceptions were, as I explained in this video, the quote-unquote Category 3 defeats that Luffy suffered to Aokiji, Kizaru, and Akainu. These were defeats that actually break Luffy in a way and force him to learn a lesson as a character. But the whole point is that this time around against Imu, it seems that Luffy is experiencing a Category 3 defeat. He's being forced to learn a lesson, but unlike against Aokiji, Kizaru, and Akainu, this time, Luffy isn't done for the arc. This time, Luffy is actually going to take a step forward as a character and conquer his demons before the arc ends. That is meant to be the difference between how things went when he was just a boy compared to now when it's time to prove he's ready to become the Pirate King. Remember, it's been established that here Luffy is supposed to do 3 things. 1, become the successor to Joy Boy and prove he's the man everyone was waiting for. 2, save Elbaf. And 3, protect his crew. And even though Luffy is being forced to grapple with his inadequacy in all 3 departments, the important point is that he is now driven to change that. Luffy wants to fix all of those things right now, not tomorrow, right this instant. And as hopeless and absurd as it seems at this moment, the consistent message throughout One Piece has always been that we shouldn't stop believing in Luffy until he stops believing in himself. It's only once Luffy truly accepts that he's done that he's actually done. Any other situation has always been one where Luffy ends up getting the last laugh. And with all that being said, it's time to address the 2 big objections that readers have. First, that it's too early for Imu to lose, and second, that there's no way Luffy should even be able to take on Imu in such a short span of time. So it's become clear at this point that One Piece is set to culminate in a massive final war with all major factions in a battle royale. The one matchup that we know is absolutely guaranteed is Luffy versus Blackbeard, and the further we go in the story, the more it appears as though Blackbeard will be the final villain of One Piece. So where does that leave Imu? Well, there are several major characters in the story who have more long-running storylines that point to them being the ones to take down Imu, such as first and most obviously Dragon, who's been at the forefront of the revolution to take down the Celestial Dragons for the longest time. Dragon is essentially the rocks of the modern day, and the path that he began walking since God Valley has always been leading to Imu. On the other hand, we have Shanks, who actually seems to have proactively been on a mission against Imu for a far longer time than anyone realized. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Oda has essentially painted Imu out as a character that it's possible many of One Piece's major side characters would be out for blood against in the final war. And that makes a lot of sense considering Oda has always portrayed Blackbeard as Luffy's endgame. If Luffy gets Blackbeard as his personal final villain, the true big bad of the series, well then what about the other major players that Oda has been building up since the start of One Piece? If Imu ultimately goes down to One Piece's biggest side characters in the final war, and Luffy gets Blackbeard, then all characters ultimately will get their share in bringing the dawn of the world, with Luffy of course getting the final and most important role, and interestingly Luffy would thereby get an even greater challenge than Joy Boy did in his war. Essentially imagine a similar scenario to what we already saw in the Wano arc. We had two major villains, Kaido and Big Mom, but ultimately Luffy got Kaido while Law and Kid got Big Mom. Luffy just isn't going to get both Imu and Blackbeard to himself in the final war when there are so many characters with major storylines to be fulfilled. But at the same time, Oda clearly didn't want to skip the conflict between Luffy and Imu because that is narratively important as well. Therefore, it appears Oda had the simple solution of creating a storyline before the final war, Elbaf, where Luffy could get his main conflict against Imu. As such, by ordering the story with this sequence, Oda gets to check a lot of things off. Luffy gets to prove himself as the successor to Joy Boy by getting his own bout with Imu in Elbaf, while Imu still gets to live to fight another day in the subsequent final war arc, so that the characters who have a much longer standing storyline to defeat Imu ultimately get to defeat him in the final war, while at that point Luffy gets to move on to the even bigger final boss, Blackbeard, to end the story. In this manner, all characters get their due, Luffy gets his battle against both Imu and Blackbeard, and assuming Blackbeard becomes an even bigger threat than Imu, then of course Luffy has to reach Imu's level sooner than later anyway. And so here we get to the final obstacle. How can Luffy logically save Elbaf and drive out Imu in a way that's believable and feels earned, while not making Imu seem too weak and also not making Luffy too overpowered heading into the final war? So we already saw one arc prior in Egghead that the Gorosei all arrived at the island through the pentagrams and the power of the Abyss, and they were all sent back once they were hit with Joy Boy's Haki. We seem set up for that exact same scenario to happen here in Elbaf, but this time there's no Haki knot that's going to do it for Luffy. Rather, Luffy is going to have to release Joy Boy level Conqueror's Haki himself to send Imu home. All signs point to this being how Luffy ends the conflict. Not only has One Piece been setting up for a long time that Luffy's next power-up will be a Conqueror's Haki bloom, Luffy recreating Joy Boy's Haki knot feat and sending Imu home is the best way to have Luffy get the better of Imu and Elbaf without Luffy truly beating Imu up in straight combat here, thereby allowing Imu to remain as a formidable threat in the final war and without making Luffy seem too overpowered heading into the final war. Allow me to explain from the top. I've talked about this in previous videos that you can watch here, so I'll keep this part short, but ever since Wano's climax, Oda's been having characters reiterate that even if Luffy's unlocked his Devil Fruit's true potential, that ultimately doesn't matter unless his Conqueror's Haki also becomes the strongest. And Luffy's limitation being his Conqueror's Haki has been highlighted in Egghead and now again in Elbaf. Kaido literally explains that Luffy's relatively weak Conqueror's Haki is what makes him unworthy of being the Pirate King, and again here in Elbaf, Gaban is highlighting how Luffy is failing to live up to the level of the Pirate King. One arc prior, Luffy was also shown Joy Boy's level of Conqueror's Haki, and Luffy realized how far away he was from that. So there's really not any secret ingredient that Oda's hiding from us at this point. Luffy's next big upgrade blatantly has to be his Conqueror's Haki. That's been spelled out over and over, and to top it off, Elbaf in general has emphasized Conqueror's Haki as a central focus. Sanji and Zoro are already locked in battle trying to upgrade theirs, very obviously Luffy needs to do so as well. On top of this, just looking at the current situation, we can break it down logically. We know that Imu cannot be permanently defeated here, he needs to remain a villain in the final war, but at the same time we know that Imu can't just go around killing everyone on the island, meaning the logical outcome is that something needs to send Imu back home. We've already been shown the exact mechanism for doing so one arc prior in Egghead. Characters who arrive through pentagrams with the power of the Abyss can be driven back home with strong enough Conqueror's Haki undoing the power of the Abyss. Therefore, logically, the way to send Imu back home has already been established. A strong enough burst of Conqueror's Haki that briefly overwhelms him should undo the Abyss's power. And it's also been spelled out that Luffy's next big upgrade needs to be Conqueror's Haki. Elbaf itself is all about Conqueror's Haki. Therefore, everything seems to add up to Luffy needing to do a large enough Conqueror's Haki release that Imu is momentarily overwhelmed, the Abyss magic is undone, and Imu is forced back to Marijua. This closes out the arc perfectly. Luffy successfully redeems himself from his initial failure to live up to Joy Boy and Roger. He proves that he is worthy to be the successor to both of them. Both Luffy's personal arc in Elbaf and the overall themes of Elbaf are fulfilled. Imu is symbolically defeated by Luffy, and readers won't necessarily be craving a rematch in the final war, thereby allowing Imu to serve as an opponent for other characters before Blackbeard surpasses Imu to become Luffy's true final nemesis. Most notably, this doesn't make Imu look bad in the long run. Being driven back by one massive Conqueror's Haki burst and being forced to leave the battlefield is, as I said, certainly a symbolic defeat, but it's not like we're going to see him get straight up beaten into the ground by Luffy, as that would ruin all sense of threat for Imu in the final war. And vice versa, Luffy having one massive Haki Bloom moment right here in Elbaf isn't the same as Luffy becoming the strongest in the world overall. Remember, as we know, Haki Blooms are often fleeting things. Characters can have huge one-off moments where they awaken their true potential, but that doesn't mean that from there on they can call upon that strength regularly. We've already seen this with Usopp's Observation Haki awakening at Dressrosa, or Zoro's Conqueror's Haki awakening moment with Ashura against Kaido, and of course with Luffy himself briefly awakening Advanced Armament against Big Mom in Udon. All of these instances were only stepping stones. They served to crack open the gates to the characters being able to master the next level soon, but it didn't mean that they could suddenly consistently use that new power right away. In fact, you could even look at Luffy's Conqueror's Haki Blooms pre-time skip. Luffy would regularly have moments where through great emotion, he would briefly be able to release his Conqueror's Haki to save the day. But that didn't mean that Luffy could just use Conqueror's Haki at will from then on. Luffy still had to learn to master it after Marineford. In that same vein, I expect that in Elbaf, we will see Luffy briefly awaken Joy Boy level Conqueror's Haki to save the day. But that doesn't mean that from now on, Luffy will just be Joy Boy's level in general and will be able to use unbeatable Haki whenever he wants in battle. No, this big Conqueror's Haki Bloom Elbaf is heading towards would likely be outside of Luffy's control, fueled entirely by intense emotion, powerful enough to momentarily stun Imu and undo the power of the Abyss and send Imu home, and serve as the necessary stepping stone for Luffy to reach his full potential in the final war. Because if the final, fully realized version of Luffy that we will likely get at the finale of One Piece will be Luffy with his awakened Nika fruit and full mastery of Joy Boy level Haki, being able to use that for coating on his attacks and so on, then the necessary step before that, which Luffy needs to get to now before the final war, is actually tapping into Joy Boy level Haki for the first time. This event concluding Elbaf would set Luffy up perfectly at the in-between stage of starting to awaken his full potential but still needing a bit more time before he can start wielding that freely in battle to coat his attacks. So let me know in the comments below if you believe that this is how they will drive Imu out of Elbaf, or if you believe it's something else. And if you enjoyed this video, then definitely like and subscribe. And if you want to hear how I think Luffy will recover from his injuries to be able to do this, then you can listen to my weekly podcast that just dropped by becoming a member or by supporting me on Patreon, link in the description below.